Hi, welcome to Ink Outside the Box. I'm Robin.
And I'm Chaz. Today, we're going to speak about plot, how to keep it original, and how to keep the tension flowing throughout.
So, in order for a plot to actually be a plot and not a premise, and we'll talk about that in a minute, your character, your main character, protagonist, needs to want something. Something needs to be in their way, and the plot revolves around what they're doing in order to get to the desire that they have, what they want, and get around all of the obstacles. So, what is one of the things that you do, Chaz, in order to make sure that you have kind of those main ingredients?
Well, I think the thing is, it's really easy, isn't it, to come up with an idea for a story. But to make that story interesting, like you say, there has to be um, some kind of loss or decision to make, or your main character has to get around something.
Hmm.
Um, Otherwise, I mean, it's not even a soap opera, is it? It's
No.
just like, voyeurism over neighbor's wall or something. It's like this, you've got to have something to push the story along, some kind of tension.
Yeah.
So what I do, I suppose I start with the idea and where I want the story to go.
Yeah.
And then I get really mean and throw rocks at my characters. Like, oh, what can I do to test this character today? And it's quite hard actually, because
Hmm.
I think sometimes we do fall in love with our characters a little bit, and we don't really want to, pull the rug out from under them. But you have to
Yeah.
keep the story interesting.
And it
So
sounds like we're talking about a novel, but we're really not just talking about a novel. Obviously, this needs to be in a novel as well. But with a novel, you have your chapters have to be like mini stories. You need to have kind of a rise and fall in each one of your chapters.
yeah,
But this will also work with a short story because you need, for a short story to be a whole story, you need a beginning, middle, and end. And for that
absolutely.
to be a complete piece, then you definitely still need a conflict. Obviously, you're not going to have conflict after conflict in a short story, but one or two, they're still going to have something that they need to go around to get to the end result.
Yeah, I agree. Um, Yeah, I mean, it's quite difficult. I think for me, I find it easier in a short story
Hmm.
because you can sort of resolve it quite quickly. I'm quite into instant gratification, so I'm quite a fan of short stories, both to read and to write. And with a novel, of course, you have to keep this tension up, so you have to keep throwing these things at them. And it can be difficult to sustain, I think. But like you say, if you treat every chapter as a short story in
Hmm.
itself, to an extent, then
Yeah.
that can work really well. That's how I tend to tackle a longer piece, to break it into smaller chunks, like chapters, short story style chapters.
Yeah, and
That's
if you have a story where your character can stay home and do absolutely nothing and nothing bad happens, then you don't have a plot. You've not got there yet. So you have to have something big. An example that I was thinking about earlier is that like if you were having a party and a dragon shows up at your party, it's how the character deals with the dragon that is the plot. Not the dragon, not the party, but the actions
absolutely.
that revolve around how that is handled. Is it a good dragon? Is it a bad dragon? It just depends on how the character handles it. And that's when you've kind of got a plot to work with, is when you have
Yeah,
the you weave the things around what is actually happening. So
absolutely.
can you
Yeah.
come up with any kind of like ideas or examples about how that's worked in one of your stories? Obviously, ones that have been published. We don't want to give away any secrets.
Um, well, so I suppose that my short story In Search of Strawberries, that was published in Cloud Sneezing recently. It's a very small snippet of life, really,
Hmm.
but it revolves around the main character Aki and their decision about whether to sell their leg.
Hmm.
So they get approached. So they're just minding their own business. There's a an inciting incident where at the beginning where they are approached by a fence type guy, a procurer, and he asks them, he offers them 10 million credits for their leg. You know, it's set in the future and people don't have a lot of meat. So that this is the premise of the story. Um, Aki's decision is the story. Um, there's, it doesn't, the rest of it is sort of filler. It's
Hmm.
Aki's decision about what to do with their leg. So they end up having a chat with their granny, and that leads to them finding something out, and that helps them make the decision. But the whole plot is based around Aki's decision.
So basically, what you're saying is in that story, which is one of yours that I absolutely love, that something has to change, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah,
been made this offer, and they're trying to weigh up what's the best idea, what's the best choice. So they have to
exactly.
figure
Yeah.
out
I mean,
what,
choice is a
that's it.
great
They
plot.
have to
It's
figure out
great
what they
for a plot.
want in order
Yes.
to move that story along, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Is their leg more important, or is the change in circumstances that getting rid of it um might provide more importance? So there's, but choices are great for plot. You think about The Hobbit. Bilbo makes that choice when he picks up the ring. He makes the choice when he picks up the Arkenstone. There's choices made throughout. He even makes right at the beginning, he makes the choice whether to follow the dwarfs on the adventure or not. And if he didn't, he'd still be sitting by his nice warm fire with the kettle just beginning to sing, and there would be no story there, as you say, if you don't
And
leave the house.
real life is full of choices. We have to
Of course,
choose
yeah,
what job we're gonna do. We have to choose, what partner that we end up with. We have to choose whether we're gonna get the brand name or the off-brand name thing in the grocery store. So we have
yeah,
choices all the time. So that makes a story a lot more realistic to people, even if those choices are huge choices like picking up that ring or in like Pride and Prejudice, when Elizabeth decides to follow her sister to see Mr. Darcy, she's making a choice. She could have just left her sister alone, and nothing really would have happened. But then we're going back to that plot thing that obviously Jane Austen knew that she needed a plot in order to move the story forward. So she had Elizabeth making choice after choice after choice all the way through the book. I do think that it's important that we make that we make our characters kind of are forced into choices, not ones
yeah.
that they really want to make, but that they're forced into making them. That's kind of where those obstacles come in.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, if you look at and so Frasier is a good example, I think, of very small choices that make that a successful sitcom. They are constantly choosing whether to like hide something, lie about something. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
those, and it makes for a very good storyline throughout. And you get that in all successful stories, I think. So yeah,
That's true.
that's
That's absolutely true. And I agree with that. And so sometimes when we're writing, we come up and we talked about this in the writer's block thing that we kind of come up against a kind of a wall that we hit. So if we have a story that feels kind of bleh, kind of flat, what would be things that you would suggest that a writer would do to kind of spice that up a little bit and make it more interesting?
Oh, well, it totally depends on the story. I mean, if it's something I'm writing, it's probably gonna be to throw in, um, you know, uh, an evil orc or I mean, it depends. Look, so if you're writing a romance, um, then you might want to throw in a love triangle. You know what I mean? If you're writing, um, in a horror genre, then you might want to throw in an extra monster. I don't know that but you need to keep it fresh. But I think without tropes as well, because it's very difficult
Hmm.
sometimes not to get cliched about these things, So I mentioned romance, bringing in a love triangle can you can go down the wrong route and make that a bit cliched. And I know we're going to talk about cliches later on. So,
Yeah.
um, but whatever you throw at you, basically just throw something, throw a rock at your character's head, just throw something at them, make them choose, but try and keep it original, I think is because no one wants to read the same story over and over again,
No.
even if it is the same story, even if it's star-crossed lovers, or even if
Hmm.
it's finding yourself or whatever,
Hmm.
which that they say there's only a certain amount of stories in existence, and all stories, all books, everything you read will be one of these different stories.
Hmm.
But you make it your own, I think. But don't be too kind to your characters, give them some spice in their life.
That's actually really hard to do, is to not,
It's
especially when you
it's
fall in
really
love with
tricky.
your characters. I'm
But
working on a
yeah,
historical fiction novel at the moment, and it kind of it's surrounding the life of this family that are living together. I'm not going to give too much away, but you really almost want to make it like the perfect family,
yeah,
that
like the
that
Waltons or
nobody ever,
something. Yeah.
yeah, that nobody ever gets mad, or nobody ever has a fight, or nobody ever disagrees with anything. Everybody's happy, and it just doesn't work like that. Life is not like
Oh, Robin, I've read the first few chapters of your novel, and yeah, you throw quite a bit at them. But I mean, look, even
that.
like Little House on the Prairie, when I was a little girl, I used to watch that. I loved that. And they had, one of them went blind. They had fires. They had, Nellie Olson being mean to them. You know what I mean? That even in a real feel good story, you've got to have some tension, I think.
One of the things that I think you can do is raise the stakes, because what happens if that character fails? So there has to be a consequence if that character isn't successful in getting to this thing that they want at the end of the day. And what makes it personal? Why does this character really want this thing, and put some time pressure on it? Like, is there a bomb that's about to go off? Is somebody about to get their life support taken away? Or somebody going to lose a marriage or a job? All of those things are intricate and realistic as well.
I agree with that. Okay, yeah, so I think, we're talking about throwing things at your character, but one thing is I think you need to make the character nice. You need to make
Hmm.
them, relatable. Not perfect, but someone that the reader is invested in, because I've read books where the main character is a bit of a bugger, and I just don't really like them.
Yeah.
And then I don't feel invested in what happens to them. So I
Hmm.
think, you know, and also, if you throw too much at them and never give them a break throughout the story, it gets a bit depressing. So I think, you've got to have like a balance of throwing rocks and then, throwing some Savlon and a pillow and a plaster. Does that make sense?
It does. It kind of goes back to what I was saying. You've got like a conflict, and then a breather, and a conflict, and
Yes,
maybe another breather, and maybe a couple conflicts,
absolutely.
and but you do have to have kind of a rest in between. Did you watch the show The Walking Dead?
I watched some of it. I didn't I
Okay.
didn't watch it all. I actually read some of the books
Okay.
before I read the show as well, yeah. So I'm
So
familiar with it.
a lot of I followed a lot of that during when the show was on. I followed a lot of it on social media. And one of the things that I would see over and over and over again in this one particular group was when there wasn't any action, when things slowed down, people were like, well, where are all the zombies, and why aren't people dying, and where's all the action? And I was thinking to myself, I actually quite liked the things that were slow, because it did two things. It gave you a breath, because if you have
Yeah,
so much action all the time, your character is going to be exhausted, and so will your reader. You have to think about the
yeah,
reader too. And it also
yeah,
gives the writer an opportunity to do some character development. Because, as you said, if you don't care about the character, you're not invested. And if your reader's
yeah,
not invested, they're not going to keep reading. You want people to read the whole thing, whether it's a short story, a graphic novel, or a chapter book. You want
Yeah.
your reader to go all the way through and finish the story because what's the point otherwise?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. Um, and I think, yeah, like you say, I mean, to it's difficult to see character development if they're constantly being bombarded. They need some rest time. And also, a tutor once said to me, actually, well, said within a tutorial to the group, look, if you've got a main character who's a copper and they are solving a murder, so they're faced with a serial killer, that's pretty tense. You don't also have to make their partner dying of cancer and their sister having a nervous breakdown and then they're about to lose the house, because they've got a lot to deal with. You don't
Hmm.
have to have them also fighting with all their colleagues. And I must admit, I watch a lot of crime drama. I love a crime drama on the TV.
Yeah,
The grittier, the better as well. But when they're always mavericks and they're never doing what their boss tells them, I just sit there thinking they'd be sacked. But
yeah,
they won't be allowed to stay on this case and solve. It doesn't matter how good you are as a detective. You're gonna get sacked if you go around behaving like that.
that's it.
And for me, that spoils the story.
Hmm.
I like a crime drama where the cops work together and solve the crime. I don't
Yeah.
need too much extra personally. I think, but obviously, you need the tension, but
Hmm.
don't go overboard.
I
I
mean,
think.
having dealing with a serial killer and then maybe having one other thing happen, that maybe their marriage is
Oh
breaking
yeah,
down or
yeah,
something like that. That's okay because that's kind of normal. We don't all just deal with
yeah,
what's going on at work. We have personal stuff
yeah,
in our
yeah,
lives too, but overloading a character is way too much. And I agree with you. And I think that is where that kind of touches on tropes again. And of course,
yeah,
we are planning on doing another video at some point in the future about tropes and cliches. So if you want to know more about these kind of things, this would be a good time to subscribe to the channel and put your little bell on to remind you when we have a new video come out. I think a good thing to do is to ask yourself two questions. What changes because of what the character is doing or is not doing? And also, how does the character grow? Again, we're going to be doing a whole video on characterization. So we're not going to get into too much here, but we definitely, I think anyway, that if you don't have change in a character, whether it's good or bad, if you don't have change in a character, then what's the point? You know,
yeah,
that kind of goes back to making sure that your plot has a beginning, middle, and end, and you have the character needing something or wanting something, the conflict or set of conflicts that stand in their way, and then either a resolution or a non-resolution at the end of it. Do they actually get what they're looking for? Does that change along the way? Or do they not get it? And then you're leaving like a cliffhanger for a future story to kind of do a second
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
That kind of goes back to the chapter thing with novels and chapter books. I think it's vital for a character to go through a metamorphosis in the process of the story, whether, like I said, whether it's a short story or a full-blown like War and Peace kind of novel.
I think a character discovering a potential that they never had is always a good way to frame it. So, like I get again, I'll go back to The Hobbit there. It's a really good example. Bilbo never wanted an adventure, but he got one and he grew as a hobbit, through that.
Hmm.
And I think that's for me, that's always a satisfying ending. Some kind of growth, even if the character didn't know they needed it.
Well, if you
I
think of
quite like that.
yourself when you're writing a plot or planning a plot, when you think of yourself, you think about who were you 20 years ago? Who were you 5 years ago?
Yeah,
So it's one of those kind of situations where you know that you've changed as a person. So I think your character has to change as well, even if it's just a short amount of time that goes through the time period there.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
do you have anything else that you want to add to this?
No, not really. I think we've covered most of it. I was thinking quite a bit about fairy tales though, and going
Mm-hmm.
back to what we said about the same stories being rehashed. I think you can quite often get a really good plot from old stories like that. So, for example, um, Red Riding Hood. Um, it's a story we all know. But Red Riding Hood could be a homeless girl
Mm-hmm.
who wears a red hoodie, and the big bad wolf could be a local gangster who's trying to tempt her into a gang. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
There's so much you can do with those some of those old stories. And I think that's a really good exercise for maybe um getting a plot started in your head. You know,
Mm-hmm.
if you don't really know where to start, take a story that you know or you love and think about how you could completely rework it. Because it's quite hard to come up with plots, I think, and that works for me. So that said, I haven't done anything other than very short stories using that method, but I think it's an interesting way of getting a plot flowing in your head.
When I was writing the historical fiction novel, I didn't actually have like the whole plot in place when I started writing it, but it came as I started writing the story. It was like, oh, I know what's going to happen now, and also listening to your characters, especially if you're writing something that's a longer piece, listening to your characters, because if you're really invested in your character yourself, and you have a really good outline in your head or on paper of who your character is, you're going to get to know that character really well in your process of writing, and that character can sometimes tell you where they want you to go with the story,
Yes.
and it can evolve. So even if you think you've got a plot that works, that might evolve over the period of time that you're writing your story. Because I know the novel that I'm working on at the moment has definitely grown arms and legs and heads and tails and everything
Yeah.
else. So it
And
can change over time, and you just have to kind of go with it and decide, do you want to push
yeah.
back against it, or do you want to kind of go with the flow?
Yeah, and you can try out different endings as well, can't you? You know, you can try out different plot twists. So recently I did a unit at uni on my master's course. And we specifically looked at endings, and I read two alternative endings for Great Expectations.
Hmm.
Um, and there was a couple of other stories we read alternative endings for as well. And it's interesting. And we had to do an exercise where we took a story we'd written and changed the ending.
Hmm.
And it's interesting to see even writers like Dickens, you know,
Yeah.
sort of play around with these things and see what he prefers. Actually, I preferred the ending he used
Hmm.
to the other version of it. So I think he chose wisely there. But you know, it's interesting that you know published authors can do this as well,
Yeah,
and it's definitely
absolutely.
something worth thinking about. I think you know just give it a go. You know, does my main character live happily ever after?
Hmm.
Or does she come to an unfortunate end? You know, it could go either way. It's interesting to see because I mean, some readers are going to love one, and some readers are going to love the other. You know, but I
And you
tell you
never
how
know,
I like.
you might even decide to put both of those endings in your book if you're writing a chapter
Oh,
book. You know,
you
I've
might.
seen that before.
Well, look at On Her Majesty's Secret Service, the
Hmm.
James Bond film where he falls in love and gets married to Tracy, and then you know she comes to an unfortunate end.
Yeah, you just
So
never know
sad.
where your plot's going
No.
to end up taking you.
Yeah, quite like it. I quite like those endings that are left open where I can
Mhm.
say, no, no, he doesn't die. No, he, he gets the girl and saves the world and kills the baddies. It's all right.
It's okay. It's going to be
Yeah,
fine.
it's like an I have your own adventure book at the end because it's like left hanging. You're like, no, no, don't do that.
Please let us know in the comments if there's something that we've missed that you want us to cover in a future video. We're going to be doing videos every week. They're going to be on Mondays at 6 p.m. UK time because we both live in the UK despite my accent. If there's something that you're wanting us to cover that we haven't covered yet, please put that down in the comments and we'll keep a note of things for future videos because we are doing this for you and we want you to be a successful writer. So just remember just to keep writing.
Yeah, and good luck.